Have you ever dreamed of visiting Ireland? Ah, yes, the mystical and magical Emerald Isle. The land of thirsty pub crawlers, guzzling gallons of green beer on St. Patrick's Day. And don't forget the roving gangs of gingers and carrot tops at the Redhead Convention in County Cork. So, why would a 7th century beehive need a criminal defense lawyer in medieval Ireland? We answer that question with the straight-up 411. Sugar did not exist. Everyone wanted and needed honey and honeycomb. It was a primary sweetener and nutritious food source, as well as a prized form of liquid currency for bartering. Rising fast in value and demand, honey was consequently a frequent source of legal contention and outraged, angry conflict. Enter the Bechbretha, which translates literally to bee judgments. It was not just a vague and flimsy pamphlet. It is a massive, sophisticated legal document dedicated exclusively to bees. Though the identity and number of original authors is lost to the mists of antiquity, 7th century Irish legal scholars, known as the Brehons, administered and enforced all rules and regulations. The Bechbretha was designed to regulate every conceivable aspect of honeybee to human contact and interactions on a daily basis. From hive ownership to bee trespass to bee-inflicted injuries, this comprehensive set of laws covered each and every potential dispute or conflict in minute and precise detail. Now, here's a foundational dilemma that tormented old-world legal minds. Bees, bless their fuzzy little bottoms, naturally refuse to recognize or honor man-made property lines. Bees hang out wherever the blossoms are bouncing. This stark reality ignited what can only be described as a property line surveyor's jurisdictional nightmare. This was a monster headache for local leaders who were trying to maintain peace and tranquility in the village. One of the most perplexing concepts was grazing trespass. If your roving bees visited a neighbor's wildflowers and hoovered up their nectar, it was considered a form of grand theft. Yes, it's true. Their tiny outlaw tongues were committing felony nectar sucking and swallowing. The compensation for nectar poaching was quite specific. The offending beekeeper owed their neighbor one full swarm of bees every 3 years. This was a rather poetic form of restitution. It was also statutory redistribution of wealth, only with more buzz and no hangover for the beneficiaries. Meticulous case study research left no legal or cultural dispute unresolved. Equitable settlement of honeybee predicaments was always the true and ultimate goal. Which landowner actually owned a swarm or hive was another thorny and complex issue. The Bechbretha painstakingly established ownership based on where a swarm originated versus where the bees actually decided to settle down. Finders keepers, losers weepers was not a valid claim to ownership. Authentic ownership became more problematic if a swarm found a hollow within a tree and decided to call it home. In this case, the actual tree property owner was granted a full 1/3 of all the honey produced. A cozy and accommodating little tree nest meant a bigger cut for the landlord. Even royalty and the church got in on the action. If a swarm settled on church land, the church received 1/3 of the honey produced. If it was on the king's land, he too was entitled to 1/3 of the haul. And if the swarm decided to make a nemed, the terminology for a high-ranking nobleman's land, its new home, that noble also received a share. Essentially, the Bechbretha instituted a form of confiscatory tax bracket system based on where your bees chose to reside. Beyond property rights, the law also addressed injuries caused by bees. The Bechbretha established a surprisingly strict personal liability for beekeepers. If your bee stung someone, you, the beekeeper, were generally on the hook for reparations. However, the law wasn't mindlessly rigid. It did ask a very important question. Did that person deserve to be stung? If the victim was being a total moron who swatted aggressively at the bees for no good reason, or, even worse, a thieving, trespassing jackass who ripped off the hive, then 0 fines were levied. The proper context of the incident ultimately determined the final judgment. But if an innocent bystander was stung, The compensation was ripe and succulent, a meal of honey. Yes, a legally mandated delicious dinner was the prescribed form of justice to cool down the pulsating heat of the stinger. But some bee stings had far more disastrous consequences. If a bee sting resulted in the blindness of someone's eye, the penalties escalated exponentially. The maximum fine might require the handing over of cattle, a significant loss of future livelihood for a poor, hard-working farmer. Here is a notorious historical example. King Condall the One-Eyed. He was, as his name suggests, blinded in one eye by a bee sting. Due to the puzzling medieval Irish ideology of royalty, a king with a physical blemish could not be tolerated. Condall was then dethroned and banished from the kingship of the province of Tara. A single blinding bee sting triggered a catastrophic political crisis. The Bechbretha even regulated interactions between bees and other animals. If your chickens invaded your neighbor's bee sanctuary and started eating their bees, then you, the chicken owner, would take the fall for first-degree insecticide. You would have to shell out compensation for those devoured pollinators. Conversely, if a rampaging bee mob conspired to successfully snuff your chicken, the beekeeper was going to take the fall for the killing. You had to pony up for that valuable bird, which likely meant either paying its village market price or turning over an equivalent bird. Chickens were quite precious assets to early farmers. However, there was a binding loophole, the apiary trespass rule. If a chicken ventured into the designated bee zone, the apiary, it was malicious trespassing. In this scenario, if the bees assassinated the chicken in self-defense, it was deemed justifiable whacking of a clueless foul bird. Yes, ancient Irish bees were protected by stand-your-ground laws against feathered fence jumpers. It's a remarkable detail that reveals the depth of thought that permeates these laws. One can almost picture a tiny courtroom drama unfolding to try the chicken slaughter case. The Bechbretha stands as a groundbreaking legal framework, far more intricate than we often imagine for ancient societies. Those ancient Irish legal minds clearly took their partnership with honeybees to heart and mind. This level of detail reflects a society that placed immense value on order and justice, even for small and vulnerable creatures. It underscores the universal truth that civilization requires implicit and explicit mutual compromise to succeed as humans. More profoundly, the Bechbretha reveals a deep respect for nature. Bees were not just insects, they were assets, partners, and sometimes dangerous attackers that needed careful management. Their contribution to society was legally recognized and protected. And finally, for any aspiring legal scholars watching this video, fragments of pages with quotations from the Bechbretha exist in 10 authenticated manuscripts, but a full and complete original edition of the Bechbretha is preserved in only one single existing manuscript. It is curated by Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland. Berin go bra, and join us for more honeybee history.